Opening the courtroom. The air in the courtroom felt heavier than it should. Warm lights above polished wood all around, and that quiet tension you could almost hear breathing between people. The judge sat straight eyes, calm voice, steady as he said, "Mr. Vale, you are hereby removed as trustee effective immediately. Control of the Vale Family Trust will be transferred to Mr. Daniel Vale effective as of this ruling." The words landed without echo, but I felt them in my chest like a dropped weight. To my left, my mother sat still, hands folded, her face the same as it had been all morning, smooth, unreadable. If she was hurt, she didn't show it. If she was angry, she hid it well. The gavel came down, once sharp, and the sound seemed to split the air in two. Somewhere behind me, cameras clicked, reporters scribbled, and the world started writing about the victory they thought I'd just won. $3 billion! That's what they'd write. Control of the Vale Family Trust, that's what they'd repeat. But all I could think about was how cold my hands felt, and how the woman who raised me had just become the person I had to beat to get here. She stood, adjusted the collar of her jacket, and walked past me without a word. Her perfume lingered, but it didn't feel familiar anymore. People think this was the day I claimed my inheritance. They're wrong. This was the day I learned what it really costs to win. Act 2, where the shift began. The first weeks after the verdict were noisy, but the noise lived outside the house. Inside it was the small sounds, footsteps on the stairs, the kettle clicking off paper, sliding under a door. My mother did not call. Claire and I did not go looking for a fight. We worked. Work helps when feelings do not know where to sit. I started with simple lists, not because lists are magic, but because order is kinder than a storm. Vendors to review sites, to visit people, to meet in person, not by email, not through a memo someone else wrote. The mine on the East Ridge was my first stop. Dust on boots whined over the cut voices on the radios. Miguel met me by the loading bay. "Morning," he said, no ceremony, no speech. He showed me the new cut, the slow belt, the place where rain had slipped under a cover last month. We walked the line and did not pretend it was perfect. When I came home, the house had that late afternoon light my grandfather liked. I stood in the study doorway, looked at his portrait, and said out loud, "Here is what I can do today." It sounded simple. It felt like a start. Back when my grandfather was alive, the kitchen table was the place where things were real. Coffee rings, pencil shavings, a ledger that smelled like paper and rain. After he died, the table stayed, but the talk changed. Meetings moved behind a door. Notes left the margins and became files with numbers and locks. My mother liked clean lines. She liked answers that did not leave fingerprints. It was not a crime. It was a style. People can build a life on style. The change began small. A supplier after 30 years was out. A clinic donation paused for a quarter. A scholarship line moved to review. You could call it prudence. You could also call it distance. I asked a few questions. I did not push. Market headwinds, someone said. Better terms, someone added. Maybe they were right. But the house felt different at night. Silence is an answer when you have lived with people long enough. One evening I passed my mother's study. Door half open, lamp on her, voice low on the phone. Not angry, not soft, just sure. When she saw me, she covered the receiver. "Late night, Daniel," I said. "Yes." She nodded. "Get some rest." I went upstairs and did not sleep. The first amendment to the trust came in a blue folder. A typed label, no note. Language that sounded careful. A date pushed 5 years tied to conditions you could defend in a room with tall windows. I stood on the terrace and read it under a yellow porch light. My mother came out and looked over the lawn. "Some roads take longer," she said. "Longer is safer." I said I understood. Maybe I did. 2 years later there were more pages, clauses like nested boxes, each one fitting inside the next. A person can get lost inside boxes if he does not mark the way out. Claire watched more than she spoke. She spent days at clinics and schools, came home with names, not numbers. She did not fight. Not at first. One night she cut an apple, set the slices on a plate and said, "If a bridge does not land anywhere, it is not a bridge." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. We tried to fix it at home. We brought small things to my mother, a line in a memo that did not match a line in a report, an expense that wore the wrong coat. She listened, careful, polite. "Thank you," she said, "I will review." 6 months later, the next amendment arrived, not a date this time. Conditions adjustable for the sake of stability. A circle drawn with a straight edge. On a Sunday, Claire found a thin envelope behind a frame in the study. My grandfather's hand on the front. To my grandchildren when safety becomes an excuse. We stood by the window and read it together. The words were not loud, they were firm. Do not confuse caution with control. If someone uses my name to lock a door that was meant to open, take the hinges off. We folded the letter and sat for a long time without talking. You do not go to court because of one paper. You go because a pattern does not break when you ask, and the people in the room stop hearing each other. We met with Oliver Reed, the lawyer, who knew my grandfather's slow way of speaking. Oliver listened. He did not rush the pauses. When we finished, he said, "If you start this, there will be no easy meals for a while. Are you ready to lose what you want to keep so you can keep what you cannot afford to lose?" We said yes. It felt honest. It also felt heavy. The day we served the petition, the sky was plain and the hallway smelled like lemon oil. Claire cried in the parking lot. Not loud, not long. We went home and made tea and sat at the kitchen table like we used to, with no ledger to read, from only the feeling that the floor had stopped moving. At the first hearing, the judge asked one question that stayed with me. At what point does safeguarding become withholding? It was not a trick. It was a measure. My mother's lawyer said the point had not been reached. I looked at my mother's hands. They did not shake. Outside, the press found their angle. Mother and son fortune and fight, old photos and clean headlines. I did not have a speech. I had a job. So we got to work. Act 3, the day. We stopped whispering. We tried to fix it at home first. No cameras, no statements, just a table and 3 chairs. The great room looked formal, but there was no food, no water, only folders. Oliver sat to my right, quiet hands folded. Claire sat to my left back, straight eyes steady. My mother came in wearing a navy suit, a small diamond at her throat hair, pinned the way she always wore it on serious days. She did not rush. She did not stall. She took the chair at the head of the table. Oliver spoke first. Dates, amendments, patterns that did not make sense anymore. He was calm, careful, plain. When he finished, the room felt a little larger, like we had opened a window. My mother looked at me, not angry, not soft. "Daniel, you are not ready. Claire, you never wanted this burden. I am keeping the trust safe, for you, for the company, for the future." I kept my voice even. "And who keeps it safe from you, mother?" Her face did not move. "You hear power, I am saying preservation." Claire spoke with the voice she saves for hard truths. "It is possession." The word sat there, no one touched it. My mother stood, smoothed the corner of a folder and said, "If you want a fight, you will have it. Remember whose name built this house." Then she left. No one spoke for a minute. The air in the room went back to being air. Oliver closed his notebook. "We are done whispering," he said. He was right. The lawsuit became public the next week. Headlines used easy words: mother, son, fortune, rift. Photos from old events cropped to look like now. People called. Some offered advice they would never take themselves. Some asked for quotes they could bend. I let Oliver handle the public part. I handled the work. Inside the case, the ground was colder. Requests for documents went in weeks, went by, answers came back thin. Under review, privilege sealed. It felt like playing a game where someone kept moving the goalposts after the whistle. Claire found the first real thread. It started with a visit to an old accountant, a man who had filed our papers back when things were simpler. He was ill, but his mind was clear. He remembered a filing error small years ago that had flashed a line no one was supposed to see. A property in Monaco paid through a company no one in the family had heard of, not on the trust ledger, listed as family retreat. He had never seen a family there. Only our mother and a guest who stayed a season. Claire brought me the company name on a sticky note. I stared at the letters until they stopped looking like a word and started looking like a door. Oliver's team followed the shells. Cayman, Luxembourg, back to a holding company that folded into a neat stack of initials. On the other side, one signature, Eleanor Vale. Photos followed, grainy but clear enough. My mother at the Monaco doorway speaking with a man I knew from conferences and quiet dinners, not a trustee, not family, a would-be buyer with soft shoes and a firm smile. We laid the trail out on Oliver's desk. He did not raise his voice. "This is not risk management," he said. "This is diversion." I nodded. I did not like the word, but it fit. The next hearing felt different. We filed the exhibits page by page. Opposing counsel objected to the heir itself. The judge let most of it in. My mother did not look at me as the photos were marked and entered. She kept her eyes on the judge's hands, still posture set. If the floor moved under her, she did not show it. In the hallway afterward, she passed within arm's reach. She paused just long enough to say, "You are tearing your own name. When the dust settles, you will still be my son." Then she walked on. Cameras blinked. I said nothing. Some answers are not for microphones. Back at the house we worked. No speeches, no big plans. We made lists and crossed off small squares, find the ledgers that had gone quiet, trace the payments that wore the wrong jacket, call the people who knew how the old systems worked. I drove to see Mr. Hale, a retired controller who kept his papers in labelled boxes and his promises in a small notebook. He had a dog that slept under the table and a pot of coffee that never seemed to empty. We talked about the year the old shaft flooded, about the time a vendor shipped the wrong bearings and owned it, fixed it, and kept our business for 10 more years. Then he opened a folder and slid out a memo from a winter no one liked to remember. A change in approval policy, quiet, centralized, temporary. The date matched the First Amendment my mother signed. It is funny how a line on paper can make your shoulders feel heavier. I thanked him, pet the dog, and drove home with the heater on low. Claire spent a day at the foundation. She walked through the clinic we had promised to repair 2 budgets ago. Buckets still sat under a leak by the pharmacy door. She came back with photos, 3 names, and a sentence you do not forget. "Daniel," I told her mother, her son's medication would not be delayed again, and I want those words to be true. We put the roof on the top of the list. It felt right to start there. The trial opened in a bright room that made everyone look a little more tired. Oliver spoke like a man who does not waste breath. He laid out the timeline, the pattern, the letter my grandfather wrote for the day we were pretending would never come. When he read, the room did not fidget. I took that as a good sign. My mother's lawyer spoke in clean, careful lines. Strategic foothold, protective layering, guardrails during volatility. He used the kind of words you can set on a shelf and admire for their shape. On cross, Oliver asked about the guest in Monaco. A business associate, my mother said. Did he make an offer to purchase Vale Mining? A small pause. Yes. That is not relevant to the trust. Oliver let the pause grow a second longer, then moved on. He did not try to make the moment larger than it was. Truth does not need more paint. We went home and made dinner. Rice, eggs, greens. I burned the first pan again. Claire took the spatula from my hand and laughed. "Watch the heat," she said. We ate at the kitchen table, the same table where my grandfather kept his ledgers, and the house felt like a place that was learning to breathe again. The morning after, we met with the audit team. No drama, just pages. Subsidiaries, affiliates, side doors, all of it on one map. Some assets came home to the ledger. Some expenses got new names. A few lines went to people whose rooms have no windows. I called 3 suppliers myself. "Sorry for the late payment," I said. "It will not happen again." One of them said, "Your grandfather used to call on Fridays." Good to hear a Vale again. I wrote that down, not because I needed to remember, but because some sentences deserve to live on paper. At night I kept the ore pebble by my notes. I am not superstitious, I just like weight. It reminds me that words are not enough and promises cost something to carry. A letter came from my mother 2 weeks later. Not long, not sharp. She would not appeal. She expected the accounting to be exact and fair, and in the places where it could not be, both it must be fair. She asked for copies of my lists. I sent them. No message. Quiet can be respect. That was the day I knew we had stopped whispering for good. Not because a judge had spoken or a headline had bent in our favor, but because the house felt honest again. Rooms do not lie. They tell you if you are doing the work or just saying you are. Before sleep, I added one more line to the bottom of the list on my desk. Do small things right until big things do not scare you. Then I turned off the lamp, and the study went back to being a room in a house, and not a room in a fight. Act 4. The Weight of Quiet Days. The weeks after the letter felt strange. No court dates, no headlines, no reason for strangers to know my name. I thought I would rest, but rest feels different when you've been moving too long. It makes you restless. I went back to the mine. Same east ridge, same wind cutting across the cut. Miguel waved me over. He was talking to a new foreman, showing him how the belt jammed when the morning frost hit. We stood there watching metal turn, slow steam rising from the machines like breath. Still not perfect, Miguel said. It never will be, I told him. He smiled like he'd heard that before. At home, Claire was in the kitchen, a stack of grant applications spread out like a deck of cards. She was reading them one by one, writing notes in the margins. Not all of them will get through, she said, but we can start with the ones that need us most. She had already circled a clinic in the hills, 2 schools, and a shelter with a roof that sagged in the middle. No speeches, just a pencil and a plan. I spent mornings in the study. The ledgers were different now, not thicker but cleaner. The numbers spoke in straight lines. I liked that. Some days I walked the perimeter of the property boots in the dirt just to remember what land feels like underfoot. I thought of my grandfather, how he'd take the same walk, then come home and write 2 sentences in his notebook. Sometimes the page stayed empty. That was all right too. One afternoon, Oliver stopped by. No suit, just a worn jacket and a folder under his arm. "Thought you'd want this," he said, handing me the final accounting. We sat at the kitchen table reading through the pages. No surprises, no hidden corners. It felt light. Before he left, Oliver looked at me and said, "Your grandfather would have liked how this ended. Not for the win, but for the way you carried it. I didn't answer right away. Some words need to settle before they sound like yours. That night, I made tea, sat by the window, and listened to the wind through the old trees. The house didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt like home. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't think about what we had lost. I thought about what we could build. Act 5. What comes back to you? The first frost came early that year. The grass in the yard turned brittle overnight, and the air carried that clean smell you only get when the cold sharpens it. I drove out before sunrise, the road to the mine empty except for one truck, a lone set of headlights in the distance. The radio was low, just a murmur of news I wasn't really hearing. When I got to the ridge, the crew was already working. Voices rose over the hum of the machines, metal clanged, and somewhere a compressor kicked in. It felt the same as it had before all of this, the fights, the courts, the headlines. Miguel handed me a mug of coffee, black, strong enough to stand a spoon in. He didn't ask about the case, and I didn't offer. Some things stay better in the quiet. Back in town, Claire was meeting with the clinic's board. They had pulled the old roof off and you could see sky through the beams. She was talking about insulation, about fixing the windows while we were at it. The budget was tight, but she'd already found 2 donors willing to match us. I sat in the back watching her lead without making it look like leading. It reminded me that the work we do after the noise is the work that lasts. That night I sat at my desk ledger, open pen in hand. The pages were clean now, lines running straight, figures where they should be. I thought of my grandfather again. How he used to say paper tells the truth, but it's the hands that write it that matter. I understood that better now. A week later, a package came in the mail. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. Inside was a photograph, my mother younger, standing with my father in front of the old ore mill, both of them smiling, sun in their eyes. No note, just the photo. I kept it on the desk next to the ore pebble. Not as a reminder of the fight, but of where we started before the weight of what we built began to pull at the seams. The house feels different now. Not quieter houses aren't supposed to be silent, but settled. Some nights I walk the halls, touch the walls, and think about how strange it is to keep a place standing, not just with money, but with care. And sometimes when the wind comes off the ridge, just right, I can almost hear the sound of my grandfather's boots on the gravel coming home. Act 6. The shape of the work. A seedwinter settled in slow frost on the windows by morning, the kind you had to scrape off in thin white curls. The mine ran shorter shifts, now light gone by late afternoon crews, moving under the dull orange of the yard lamps. I spent more time at the foundation, not in an office. I never liked closed doors, but out where things were happening. The clinic's new roof was up steel sheets, catching what little sun we had, draining clean into new gutters. Claire had her hands in everything, choosing paint, checking the plumbing, making sure the storage rooms smelled like antiseptic, not mildew. She didn't do it for thanks, and I think that's why people trusted her. One morning, a man named Harris stopped me in the hall. He ran the small library at the edge of town, said he'd heard we were fixing roofs, told me his was leaking too. He didn't ask for money, just if I could come look. I went that afternoon. The place was quiet, just the sound of a clock ticking in the corner. Shelves leaned a little. The carpet was worn thin, but you could smell the books, old paper ink dust warmed by sunlight. We walked to the back, and there it was, a dark stain on the ceiling, water pooling in the light fixture. I told him we'd take care of it. No forms, no meeting, just yes. That night I sat with Claire at the kitchen table, a map of the county spread between us. We marked the places that needed work, red for urgent, blue for before spring. It felt good to see the whole thing laid out like a problem you could actually solve. I kept thinking about how a year ago my life had been nothing but closed rooms, sealed files, conversations that never made it past the front gate. Now it was doors opening one after another. By the end of the week, we had crews lined up, roofers, carpenters, electricians, some paid, some just showing up with tools because they wanted to help. It made the work move faster, but more than that, it made the work feel shared. And in the middle of all that noise, hammers, ladders, voices calling over the wind, I realized something. The fight with my mother had been about control. This work was about trust. Not the kind you put in a legal document, but the kind you put in people. Act 7, The Visit. It was a Sunday when my mother came by. No call ahead, no driver at the gate, just the bell once and Lydia's voice down the hall. She's here. I met her in the front room. We stood like guests in a house we both knew too well. She looked past me at the portrait on the wall, my grandfather in his crooked tie. Still the same, she said. Still the same, I answered. I came for the blue ledgers, she said, the ones from the early years before the new system. I nodded. They're boxed in the study, I said. I'll help you carry them. I can manage, she said. We both knew she could. In the study, she ran a hand along the shelf, not to dust, just to touch. You cleaned this room, she said. I opened the windows, I answered. The air is good, she said. It was the closest thing to approval we had spoken in months. She took 2 boxes, I took 2. We carried them to the car. At the door she paused. I will not rewrite what I did, she said. I know I told her, and I will not rewrite what it cost. Her eyes held mine a second longer than they used to. Take care of your sister, she said. I am, I answered. She looked like she might say more, but the moment passed. She drove away without looking back. Inside, I stood in the study and listened to the quiet return to its corners. Then I opened a window that had stuck for years. It moved on the second try. Some things do. Act 8, The Boardroom Reset. By late winter, it was time to meet the board, not for show, not for a headliner, for governance. We gathered in the long room with the glass wall that looks over the yard. Old members, new faces, one seat empty for a name we would not fill again. I spoke plainly. No slides, no phrases that hide inside themselves. We are going to make plain language reports. Monthly. We will publish every subsidiary. We will close the shells that close doors. Compensation will tie to safety and uptime, not only to price. If we pause dividends to fix roofs and clinics, we will say so, and we will say why. A few people shifted in their chairs, not angry, just surprised. Questions, I asked. A woman from audit raised her hand. What about legacy commitments? We keep them, I said, but we will define them out loud. Miguel, now promoted to operations director, added, and we will not run belts past safe just to meet a number. He did not look at anyone when he said it. He looked at the table. Truth is a good place to set your eyes. We voted on the changes. It was not unanimous. It was enough. After the meeting, I walked the yard with Miguel. He pointed at a rusted catwalk and said, "That used to scare me in the wind." "Then it goes," I said. He smiled. "Tomorrow?" And it did. Act 9. The letters we answer. Spring pushed back against the cold, not all at once. One green line along the ditch buds on the camellia's mud, where snow had sat too long. Claire brought me a stack of letters at breakfast. Kids drew pictures of the clinic roof. She said some of them put the gutters in. We laughed. And then we read every note. We answered each one, even when it was only a sentence. "Thank you for your drawing. The roof will keep the medicine dry." We signed them both, not because our names mattered, but because a response should feel like a person, not a system. A letter from a competitor arrived the same week. Short, surprisingly kind. Disagreements are loud, steadiness is quiet. You chose quiet, respect. I pinned it inside a drawer, not to keep, just to remember there are people who work in daylight, even in markets that prefer shade. On Friday, I drove to the library with Harris. We climbed a narrow stair to the roof. It was soft in one corner, black spongy wood under the tar. We marked it and came down. In the front room, a girl was reading out loud to her brother, sounding out the long words, taking her time. I thought, this is why we keep the doors open, so someone can find a word, and then another, and then a whole sentence that belongs to them. Act 10. The Gate We Open. We held the scholarship meeting under the big sycamore. Folding chairs, paper cups, a list of names. No stage, no speeches. Claire read the awards, then handed out envelopes. A boy in a clean shirt shook my hand and did not let go right away. My dad works the night shift, he said. He's sleeping. I'll tell him you said hello. Tell him I said see you. Tuesday, I answered, we're changing the guard fence near the north ramp. He nodded like that made perfect sense. From the edge of the crowd, I felt a familiar attention. I turned and saw my mother standing by the gate, not close, not far. She had a light coat on, hands in the pockets, face soft in a way that would not show up in a photograph. We did not wave, we did not move. When the meeting ended, she was gone. But on the table by the gate where we kept the extra pens, someone had left a single blue ledger, empty, the kind we used to use before computers did all the remembering. No note. Just paper. I opened it to the first page and wrote, Scholarships Year 1. Then I wrote the names slowly so I would not miss a letter. That night I walked the house. Windows, open air, moving the curtains the way breath moves a sleeping chest. I set my grandfather's oar pebble beside the new ledger, and I straightened the portrait by a fraction of an inch. Before I turned off the light, I added one more line to the list. Carry it right. Some stories end with cheers. Ours ends with work, and tomorrow we start again.